Guys, welcome back to week 2 of our story. If you did not see last week, you have to go watch it first because this week is not going to make sense without you getting that foundation first. But in summary, what I talked about last week was us getting married, us buying that first house, the foreclosure brick rancher frat house. Yes, you heard me right. That literally was all we could afford. That house kind of sparking our love for renovation and design, but also us getting to a point with our debt that we realized something had to give and that we weren't going to survive. So let's launch into this week. As I said last week, we had, when we got married, several $100,000 in college debt. We knew that something had to change, but we had no clue what. And I'll never forget one Sunday afternoon, after a year of just despair and trying to figure this out and coming up with nothing, Chris set me down at the dining table. He said, "You might need to sit down for this." So I knew that something big was coming. He set me down and he said, "Lindsay, God has told me that we're supposed to sell this house. And I really believe that's what we're supposed to do." Now, y'all have to understand how tied I had become to the idea of home. I'd fallen in love with that, with designing this house. And as I said in last week's video, we literally, when we bought this, thought this is our forever home. We are going to raise our babies here. And when he told me this, we'd lived there just like 13 months. So imagine my surprise. And if you don't know me well, I don't handle change well. It takes me a minute to adjust, which I've gotten so much better at. I've had to with where the direction our life has taken, which is good. I'm thankful for that growth. But I didn't handle that well. But over the next hour, Chris laid out what that would look like for us. He is such an entrepreneur, such a business mind, which I don't have, and I'm so thankful that he does, because our family is better because of it. As I said in last week's video, we had done Dave Ramsey that year, Financial Peace, and what we learned from that was that number one, we are not going to make it. We're not going to survive unless something big changes. And number two, sometimes we have to do radical things to get out of debt and live as God wants us to. And so we had started to process that, and Chris really felt that this was our radical thing. We had bought that as a foreclosure frat house, and we had updated it, which for us at that time meant renovating 2 bathrooms that we had learned so much from, and basically painting the rest of the house. That was it. We made no major upgrades beyond that. But because of those things, it was appraised for significantly more than we had in it. And Chris knew that the market in Greenville was good. If we can sell this, we're going to have a chunk of money that's more than what either of us makes in a year that we can chunk onto debt. And we love renovating, so hey, let's buy a cheap house somewhere, renovate it for our family, and have that chunk paid off debt. So Chris had somewhere he had to go that afternoon. I can't even remember where it was, but we had this conversation and then he left me to go do whatever it was. And y'all, I walked around that house and cried. And I pictured in each room 3 little blonde-headed babies, because I knew in my mind that's what we were going to have, playing. I did dishes at the sink, and I looked out the window to the backyard and pictured them out there on an imaginary playground. And I just mourned the life that I thought we were going to have there. But by the time he got home that evening, within a few hours, I had no doubt that he was right, that was our radical thing, and told him, I said, that's what we're supposed to do. God just gave me such a peace about it. Even though it was still hard, I knew that was the answer. And I think for us, as much as we loved that house, and as much as we'd fallen in love with this idea of home for our family, we started to realize that that home meant nothing if we are completely enslaved to this debt for the next 30 years. Like, that is not the life that we want, and it is not the life that we want for our family. And hey, we love renovating, so why not do this again? So we had a few bullet list things we had to do on that house to list it. We flew in, we did those. During this time, another cool thing happened, which is just awesome to see. God's hand literally on every part of our story, which as I continue this, I hope y'all will see that too. And as I finish it, we're really going to talk about that. But during this time, we started to realize that we wanted to live in a downtown area. Where we were living before was further out. So we started searching downtown neighborhoods because we loved downtown and the urban feel of it. But if any of you know anything about any downtown area really, but especially Greenville, that is very expensive. That comes with a high price tag, which did not fit the vision, right? We needed to buy an even cheaper house than we'd bought last time for this plan to work. So we stumbled upon this little area because we saw on Realtor.com that houses there were selling for $60,000 and $70,000. The first time we drove through, we're like, oh no, we can't live there, and drove out immediately. Well, at this time, I had graduated with my graduate degree in writing, and so I was teaching high school, teaching writing classes. And I became friends with another young English teacher there. And one day she just happened to tell me where she lived. And it was that neighborhood. And that her and her husband loved it so much. They were such strong believers. So much about their perspective really inspired us. And they had a vision that went beyond living in a cheap downtown neighborhood and that being cool, but that they had a vision to really see their neighborhood and their area as a ministry and embrace the transitional aspect of it, and just really choose to live there to reach people for the kingdom. And that idea became life-giving for us. So we started driving through this area, and the more we drove through it, we realized that before our perspective was, oh my gosh, that's an unfixed up house, or there's stuff in the yard, this is unsafe. And our perspective quickly changed on that, and we really fell in love with the neighborhood. So we spent literally, every other day, we're scouring this neighborhood. Our brick rancher was not even for sale yet. We could not buy anything, but we just spent all our time going through this neighborhood and just felt such a strong connection with it, and just felt God saying, this is where you need to be. So one Sunday afternoon, we were driving through here. Gracie was in the car, and she started barking, and we thought she had to go to the bathroom. So we literally pull over on one of these streets, let her out to go to the bathroom, and a lady comes out of the house right there. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, great, we're letting our dog pee in her yard. I'm sure she's going to be upset with us. And we started talking to her, and she was a realtor who lived in this neighborhood, and they had renovated their house. They had the exact same vision as our friends for this neighborhood. And listening to her talk and how she loved Jesus and how that had formulated their whole vision for being here was so contagious to us. And we befriended her, kept in touch with her. She ended up listing our house, and it took about 3 months for our other house to sell. But after Christmas, right after Christmas, we got an offer on it. At that point, we had lived there for a little over 2 years, which every state's different. If you are in South Carolina, you may know that you need to sell after the 2-year point to not pay taxes on the profit. So for us, that was crucial. She helped us sell our house, and the buyer of our house had a really, really fun request that she wanted it closed and us out in 3 weeks. And from the time we got the offer, we were so excited to sell. We accepted those terms crazily, and immediately began this frantic hunt in this neighborhood for a house. And within the time, which was a little less than a year that we had watched this neighborhood, it had skyrocketed. Investors were everywhere. So the idea of getting a house felt really, really impossible. There weren't many listed like there had been when we first started looking. Stuff was being flipped like crazy. And so we literally had no clue where we were going to go. We signed those papers and said, yes, we'll be out in 3 weeks. And we had ourselves and Gracie, our full-grown Great Dane at that point, and had no clue where we were going to go. So that was stressful, but it was also exciting because with it being set up that way, how we met our realtor, the offer we got, the time frame, and then what God provided next, left zero doubt in our minds that God is doing this. Like, we could not physically make these things happen, and He is doing it. Which became a really exciting thing for us. We were stressed. We had no clue if we were going to find the next house. We didn't know what any of that looked like. But we had confidence that He was going to provide it, because He was showing us so clearly that this is the path I have you on. So when Chris had set me down and said we need to sell this house, our vision at that point, we weren't looking for another forever house, because we didn't think that would be the vision, but we thought we were looking for a more long-term house. By the time we sold, God had really shifted our perspective, and we went in knowing we're looking for another 2-year house, maybe a little bit above that. But because we realized how life-changing that vision was for us. We loved renovating so much. It brought us together. But selling that first house, while it helped with debt, it didn't come close to putting a dent in it. And we realized we'd kind of been bitten by the bug that, hey, we can make some radical changes in our life that are going to take care of that, and the life of our entire family is going to look different, and what we're capable of doing is going to look different. And at that point, we didn't even really know what that would mean, but now we kind of do. We're starting to see some of that, and I'm so thankful that those 2 young crazy kids were willing to make those sacrifices, because our life is so unbelievably different and peaceful compared to those days, because we were willing to kind of do some hard things, crazy things, many say, I realize. But okay, so during that 3-week period, we signed that offer, had 3 weeks to be out, had nowhere to go. We found a house a block away from our realtor that had been listed as a rental, and approached the owner, and he was willing to sell. And so we got that house under contract. He allowed us to, when our house closed in 3 weeks, so this was like a week and a half from us talking to him, to immediately move into that house and rent it back until we closed with him, which was another 2 months-ish at the time. And then we would start a renovation. So if any of you've seen the befores of that house, I call it the Downtown Cottage, and I'm linking some stuff below it so you can go back and look. It was a rough house, and this was the first large-scale renovation that we had done. Like, the last house was so much more cosmetic. My dad laughs now, because they moved us in 3 weeks after we closed on that beautiful ranch that we had finished and created for our family. They moved us into this tiny little dirty, rundown cottage in this questionable, in their minds, downtown neighborhood. And he still says to this day, I got in the car and told your mom, what in the heck are they thinking? They've lost their minds. And I know they were not the only ones who thought that. But I still think back to that night. My parents and our community group at church moved us in and left. Chris and I are sitting there in this little tiny makeshift living room that we've put together in the midst of boxes and stuff everywhere. And I know many of them thought they've lost their minds. But as we sat there, we'd left this much larger, nicer house and moved into this. We sat there and we were excited, because we had felt the taste of freedom. Only a tiny taste of it. We'd all, debt-wise, we had a long way to go, but we had felt a taste of what that journey could bring us. And the more and more taste we got of that, we were addicted to it, because we just realized that, while that decision came with a lot of sacrifice for us, and I cried lots of tears over it, y'all, don't doubt that, but we started to have a vision of our family living free, and could not get that out of our minds, and that's what we wanted. So I'm going to leave off there for week 2. We've moved into that rental, the Downtown Cottage, and we're waiting to close on it. Next week, I'll share a lot about our vision and our journey there. The Downtown Cottage is where so much of my very personal blog started to develop into a business. I'm going to talk about that. It's also where Rosie was born, and so much about our family really started to change. Jobs changed, a lot changed there before we moved on to the Buffalo Bungalow where I'm sitting now. So next week I'll be sharing all those details. Make sure you tune in for that. Thanks for listening to our story, guys. It's such an honor and a pleasure to share it with you.